Hi, I'm Shannon Stubbs, the Member of Parliament for Lakeland. At the beginning of every Parliament, there's a draw for individual members of Parliament to bring forward a bill or a motion. That's called private members' business. Now, some MPs never get this opportunity, but I'm fortunate to have this chance for a second time already. Last term, you might remember, I had the opportunity to bring forward Motion 167, which called for action on rural crime. I worked with all parties, secured support of hundreds of Canadians across the country, accepted amendments, and ultimately it passed the House of Commons with unanimous support. So today, I want to talk to you about my new private members bill this term. Now, my goal is always to do what is in the best interests of Lakeland, of Alberta, and for all Canadians. So I introduced Bill C-221, the Environmental Restoration Incentive Act, in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago on February 25th. Canadian oil and gas producers are world leaders in environmental remediation and reclamation. But a combination of economic, policy, legislative, and regulatory factors has led to a historic and major collapse in investment, businesses, and jobs in Canada's energy sector. There's a perfect storm of low prices and a lack of pipelines to transport new production. Now, one consequence is that record bankruptcies have caused the number of orphan wells to increase by over 300% since 2015. And this is an urgent economic and environmental challenge in rural municipalities in particular, for rural municipal governments, for landowners on Crown land, and for Indigenous communities. Normally, orphan wells become the responsibility of the provincial orphan well funds or associations, which in strong economic conditions are remediated on schedule through levies on all the other active producers. But these orphan well funds are at risk of being overwhelmed and putting taxpayers at risk of eventually having to bear 100% of the cost for decommissioning, for closure, for remediation, and for reclamation. There are more than 130,000 inactive wells in Canada. It's estimated that it could cost between $30 billion and $70 billion to fully decommission current active and inactive oil and gas wells in Canada. Between 2015 and 2018 in Alberta alone, the number of orphan wells skyrocketed from 768 to over 3,400. And there are a total of 90,000 inactive wells in Alberta. You've probably seen recently the Alberta government is taking action. They announced a $100 million loan to the Provincial Orphan Well Fund to remediate 1,000 wells, and they promise more action to come. There's no doubt that this is a complex challenge, which requires a multi-pronged effort from both the provincial and federal government. What Bill C-221, the Environmental Restoration Incentive Act, proposes is a non-refundable tax credit that could eventually enable a flow-through share to encourage small and medium producers to take immediate action, to create jobs, and to deal with the pressing challenge of suspended and inactive wells. This bill applies only to small and medium producers in Canada, responsible for about 1/4 of total Canadian oil production. So for context, these producers have on average one well for every 10 wells of the large and multinational operators, which won't qualify for this tax credit. It really is the smallest producers hit the hardest and struggling the most to raise capital. So here's how it works. If Bill C-221 passes, the non-refundable tax credit will help small and medium oil and gas producers right away. Now, the second half of Bill C-221 makes the case for this credit to qualify for the flow-through share provisions of the Income Tax Act. So when a producer wants to raise money from private investors, the producer can attach the value of this tax credit to a share of the company that is then sold to an investor. So you see how the investor gets the share and the tax credit. And in this way, the value of the tax credit flows through to the shareholder. What this means is that the tax credit the producer gives up becomes the profit margin for the investor that purchases these shares. That's a big incentive for outside investors to contribute funds and capital to companies specifically for decommissioning wells, even when the company's share price is not expected to increase. The growing number of temporarily suspended and inactive wells awaiting decommissioning is not evasion nor neglect, by small oil and gas producers in Canada. It's just a stark reality of their precarious economic positions. Smaller producers simply don't have the money left in their businesses, and they can't raise the money needed to proactively address their inactive wells in the way that they want. The 2019 Redwater Supreme Court decision was the right ruling at the wrong time because it dried up private sector sources of investment. And it compounds all the other challenges that small and medium producers face. So they're stuck. Provinces have called for action on the growing challenge of orphaned and abandoned wells. Alberta is calling for flow-through shares in order to allow the private sector to accelerate oil and gas well reclamation. Premier Jason Kenney advocates this to, quote, get the oil field service sector back to work while reducing an environmental liability. The Premier of Saskatchewan has also made similar calls for this action. So as a federal MP, this is what I can do to bring forward a solution. Now, it's not a perfect remedy, and there are actually many solutions, but Bill C-221 is good for the environment. It helps struggling small and medium producers. It helps out the little guy. And it builds an opportunity for immediate job creation for experienced, highly skilled workers in the oil and gas service sector now. Now, to have the greatest impact and to actually implement the flow-through shares part, I need the Liberal government to partner with me. This has to absolutely be a collaborative effort with all members of Parliament in order to succeed. And while I'm an aggressive advocate for Lakeland and for Alberta, that's true to say, I do have a track record of working cooperatively with other parties. Because what ultimately matters most to me is doing the right thing and helping to advance meaningful initiatives for my constituents, not politics and not partisanship. In the previous term, I accepted significant amendments from another party to my motion 167 on rural crime, and that helped it ultimately receive the unanimous support in the House of Commons. Similarly, the current situation with orphan wells is escalating with many different impacts, particularly in Lakeland and in Alberta. But I believe the objective of C-221 is important to all Canadians. It's best for Canada. And I believe all members of Parliament are morally, politically, and philosophically obligated to find common ground to address this challenge. So that's the opportunity I'm aiming to provide. Please contact your member of Parliament to encourage them to support Bill C-221, the Environmental Restoration Incentive Act. Alberta has a long history of leadership on environmental stewardship and innovation. And this is just another small but creative and important way to generate jobs and to address an environmental concern in Alberta and across Canada. Stay tuned, there's more to come. Thanks for your support.